Welcome to The Sleepy Voice, the podcast your sleep is waiting for. So find your favorite position, close your eyes, and let the sleepy voice lead you into sleep. I'm so happy you're here, ready to unwind, relax, and drift gently into sleep. Tonight, we'll take a journey through time, exploring the most bizarre, curious, and sometimes downright unbelievable facts about the kings of England. This is history as you've never heard it before. Soft, dreamy, and perfect for easing your mind at bedtime. So, snuggle under the covers, take a deep breath in, and let it out slowly. Let the day melt away as we begin our sleepy story. Once upon a time, across the misty hills and winding rivers of ancient England, ruled a line of kings whose lives were filled with tales as strange as they were grand. Let's drift through the centuries and uncover these curious royal moments. Once upon a time, long, long ago, in the early years of the 13th century, there ruled a king whose name would echo through history with a peculiar blend of dread and intrigue. King John of England. His reign was marked by turmoil, rebellion, and strife. Yet there was one tale from his life that has drifted through the centuries like a whispered legend, a tale of treasure lost to the tides of time, a tale perfect for you to hear now as you lie warm and safe, ready to drift into a peaceful sleep. Picture the scene. The year was 1216. The land of England lay weary beneath darkened skies. King John, worn thin by battles and betrayals, was a man burdened by the weight of a troubled crown. His rule had been contested from the very start, and now, as civil war gripped the realm and foreign forces threatened his throne, the king sought refuge, moving restlessly from one castle to another, seeking to outwit his enemies and preserve what remained of his royal power. It was autumn, and the winds that swept across the land carried with them a chill that seemed to echo the uncertainty in the king's heart. The leaves, painted in hues of gold and crimson, swirled through the air, caught in invisible currents. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and shadows deepened over England. King John, weary and anxious, traveled with his retinue, a grand procession of soldiers, nobles, servants, and wagons laden with his most prized possessions. Among them were chests overflowing with gold coins, goblets encrusted with emeralds and sapphires, jeweled swords, ceremonial robes woven from the finest silks, and, most precious of all, the crown jewels of England. These sacred treasures were more than objects of beauty. They were symbols of divine kingship, of the legitimacy of John's rule, and they were his most jealously guarded prize. But danger loomed. The rebel forces, strengthened by foreign allies, were closing in. The king needed to reach safer ground to outmaneuver his enemies and secure his hold on the throne. To do so, he had to cross a treacherous stretch of land known as the Wash, a vast expanse of coastal marshes and tidal flats in the east of England, where the sea's moods could shift in an instant. And so the plan was made. The king himself would travel along a safer inland route to the nearby stronghold of Newark, while his heavily burdened baggage train would take a more direct path across the Wash. The crossing was risky, but time was of the essence. The tides, they believed, could be timed precisely, allowing the wagons to pass safely across the firm sands before the sea returned. As dawn broke, a pale sun rose behind veils of mist. The air was damp and heavy with salt. The retinue set out, a long, winding caravan making its way toward the fateful crossing. Horses snorted and stamped as they pulled the great wagons. The clinking of chains and the creak of wheels echoed across the silent flats. The sea lay far in the distance, its restless waves murmuring beneath a sullen sky. The marshlands were eerily beautiful, a place where earth, water, and sky seemed to blend into one seamless whole. The grasses whispered in the breeze, and seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries thin and plaintive. It was a land caught between worlds, where the boundary between safety and peril was as fluid as the shifting tides themselves. The caravan advanced slowly, the weight of the treasure-laden wagons making each step a labor. Men called to one another, urging the horses onward. Time was short. The tide, though far away, was a force none could challenge. Yet the sands, seemingly firm at first, began to betray their nature. Wheels sank deeper, hooves struggled to find purchase. The mud grew thick, clinging to boots and wheels alike, and then the sea began its return. At first, it was but a distant murmur, a faint rumble on the edge of hearing, but soon the sound grew louder, a low roar that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The tide was coming in faster than expected, driven by unseen forces, swift and merciless. Panic rippled through the ranks. The order was given to hasten the crossing, but it was too late. The treacherous sands turned to sucking mire beneath the wagons. Horses reared and screamed, their eyes wild with fear. Men shouted, cursed, prayed. The sea advanced in great, foaming waves, devouring the flats with terrifying speed. One by one, the great wagons tipped and toppled. Chests burst open, spilling gold and jewels into the swirling waters. Silks floated like ghostly banners, then vanished beneath the waves. The crown jewels, those sacred symbols of kingship, were lost in an instant, swallowed by the merciless tide. The survivors fled, abandoning treasure and comrades alike, struggling through the rising waters to the safety of higher ground. Behind them, the sea claimed its prize. When the tide at last receded, the flats lay silent once more, as if the drama had never occurred. But beneath the mud and silt, the lost riches of King John remained, hidden from the eyes of men. Word of the disaster soon reached the king. In his camp at Newark, John received the news with a heavy heart. His treasure, his symbols of power, were gone, and as if fate itself sought to deepen his misery, illness struck him down soon after. Feverish and broken, King John would not long survive the loss. Within days, he passed from this world, his crown gone, his kingdom in turmoil. And so, the tale of King John's lost crown jewels became legend, a story whispered through generations, of royal pride undone by the sea's timeless hunger. Some say the treasure remains there still, deep beneath the mudflats of the Wash, glimmering in the darkness, untouched by time. As you lie here now, warm and safe, imagine that ancient, shifting landscape, the gentle lapping of the tide, the faint glint of gold beneath the sand, and let your thoughts drift like the sea soft and slow, as you begin to drift too. Long ago, in a grand and gilded court, where velvet banners swayed and candlelight danced upon polished stone, there lived a king whose name would be etched in history with a mixture of awe and unease. Henry VIII, a name that summons images of towering feasts, dramatic marriages, and a crown worn with both splendor and weight. Yet beneath the heavy robes of monarchy, beyond the stories of wives and wars, there existed another Henry, a man of melody, of rhythm, of music that seemed to flow through his very soul like a gentle stream winding through an ancient wood. In those days, the English court was not merely a place of politics and power. It was a world alive with sound. Lutes strummed softly in shadowed alcoves. Harpsichords sang beneath slender fingers. Flutes and viols and voices mingled, creating a tapestry of music that wove itself through the corridors of power. It was in this world that young Henry grew, a prince who, from his earliest days, was drawn to the language of notes and harmonies more deeply than to the stern codes of governance. Imagine the boy prince, not yet burdened by the cares of kingship, wandering the halls of Eltham Palace, his bright eyes gleaming with curiosity. He would pause to listen whenever music drifted through the air. The crisp pluck of a lute string, the delicate sigh of a recorder. He learned early, absorbing each note, each chord, with the hunger of a soul that knew instinctively the solace and beauty to be found in sound. As he grew, so did his passion. Tutors were summoned from across Europe to refine his gifts, for young Henry was not content to be a passive listener. No, he longed to create. His fingers danced across the keys of the virginals, traced the neck of the lute, commanded the bow of the viol. His voice, rich and resonant, filled the vaulted halls with song. He composed, too, weaving his own melodies, sometimes soft and plaintive, sometimes bold and full of life. Music was his refuge, his delight, and though few might have guessed it then, it would remain so even as the crown pressed heavier upon his brow. Years passed, and the boy became a king. The great halls of Hampton Court echoed now not only with the steps of courtiers, but with the strains of Henry's music. Amid the pageantry and the intrigues of court life, he found a solace still at the keyboard or beneath the warm, familiar weight of his lute. He composed with a heart unguarded, pouring into his melodies the longing, the joy, the unspoken fears of a man who knew that crowns could never shield one from the currents of fate. Of all the songs said to bear his hand, one has echoed longest through the corridors of time, a lilting, haunting melody known as Greensleeves. Though scholars still debate the truth of its origins, the legend holds that Henry himself, moved by love and longing, crafted its bittersweet strains. Picture the king alone in his chambers, candlelight flickering upon parchment as his quill scratches out notes born from a restless heart. The melody is simple, yet achingly beautiful, a song of yearning, of the soft ache of unattainable love. Its notes seem to drift even now through the folds of history, gentle as the breeze that stirs your dreams tonight. Music was woven into every corner of Henry's court. Lavish masques and banquets were accompanied by choirs and consorts. Visiting dignitaries were greeted not only with feasts, but with music composed by the king himself. He took pride not merely in commissioning great works, but in performing them, his voice blending with those of his courtiers, his fingers shaping the very sounds that would echo through the stone halls. Yet perhaps the truest beauty of Henry's musical soul lay not in the grand performances, but in quieter moments, in the hush of evening, when the burdens of kingship grew heavy and the flickering shadows lengthened. He would often retreat to a favorite chamber where a single lute awaited him. There, beneath the pale glow of the moon through stained glass, he would play, soft, slow, lost in reverie. The music was not for an audience. It was for himself alone, a private communion with the one language that never betrayed. Through the years, as triumphs came and faded, as the crown's weight grew more burdensome with each passing sorrow, Henry returned again and again to his music. In joy, he played with abandon. In grief, with aching tenderness. When the court whispered of new alliances or plotted beneath their polished smiles, the king would sometimes answer with a song, as if through melody he could voice the truths words dared not speak, as age and illness crept upon him. When the grandeur of his reign seemed to dim beneath the shadow of regret, it was music that offered a final refuge. His steps grew slow, his body weakened, yet within his heart the melodies remained vibrant and alive. Even when he could no longer dance as he once had, he would summon musicians to his side, listening with closed eyes as the notes carried him away beyond the confines of age and pain. Imagine now the aging king seated in a great chair, a soft cloak draped across his shoulders. The air is heavy with the scent of beeswax and rosewood. A lute begins to play, gentle, soothing. Henry listens, each note awakening memories of youth, of love, of loss. His fingers twitch, as if yearning once more to shape the strings themselves. In that moment, the crown and all its trials fade away. He is simply a man, moved by the timeless language of music, and as the final notes linger in the air, fading into the soft hush of the chamber, so too does the story of Henry's musical heart drift gently through the ages, a story not of power or conquest, but of the quiet, universal yearning to create beauty in a world too often touched by sorrow. There are kings remembered for their conquests, kings remembered for their cruelty, and kings whose names stir tales of grandeur and pride. And then there is King George III, a monarch whose story has come to us wrapped in whispers of madness, in shadows of mystery and sorrow. Yet beneath the veil of history's judgments lies a tale far more human, a tale of a man who sought to govern with care, yet who wandered now and then through strange landscapes of the mind, lost among the shifting sands of reality. Let us drift back now to England in the late 18th century. The air is thick with the sense of coal smoke and damp stone. Cobbled streets echo with the clip-clop of horses, while far across the sea, restless colonies stir toward rebellion. At the heart of this vast empire sits a king, George, by the grace of God, ruler of Britain and Ireland. His court is splendid, gleaming with gold and the finest silks. Yet the man who wears the crown is, in many ways, a simple soul. George was not raised to revel in extravagance. He loved order, routine, the honest pleasures of family, and the quiet rhythms of rural life. He rose early, walked in his gardens, played with his children, and cherished the steady ticking of clocks, the comfort of things that ran as they should. He played the harpsichord with gentle skill, finding peace in the flow of notes that needed no governance beyond the touch of his fingers. But within him lay a fragile thread, stretched tighter with the burdens of rule. For in those days, the role of a king was not an easy one. Parliament pulled in one direction, restless colonies in another. The weight of expectation, of duty unending, pressed upon George's brow more heavily than any crown. And so, the first whispers began. At first, it was nothing. A sudden burst of speech, a sleepless night. The physicians were called, prescribing tinctures of herbs and draughts of laudanum. The king himself dismissed the spells, returning to his gardens, to the comforting order of nature. Yet the episodes returned. Longer now, stranger. Imagine the king one winter evening, seated in his great study. The fire crackles softly, papers lie, scattered before him, waiting for his signature. Yet his gaze drifts, no longer seeing the words. He begins to speak, not to his ministers or his courtiers, but to the empty air, as though unseen companions fill the room. His voice grows louder, words tumbling in strange, unending torrents, racing faster than thought. His courtiers, uncertain and afraid, listen in silence. The doctors are summoned again. This time, they stay. The king's mind, once so ordered, so precise, begins to wander into strange realms. He talks of visions, of bright lights, of voices none can hear. He claims the rivers outside sing to him, that the ancient oaks bow in greeting. He addresses long-dead kings as though they sit beside him, sharing counsel through the long hours of the night. And the strangest tale of all, the oak tree, one crisp morning, with frost glittering upon the palace lawns, George insists upon a walk. His attendants, wary yet obedient, follow. The king strides ahead, eyes bright with restless energy. At the edge of the gardens stands an ancient oak, its gnarled branches stretching toward the pale sky. George halts before it and begins to speak. For hours, he stands there, conversing earnestly with the silent tree. He bows, gestures, laughs aloud, answering voices only he can hear. To those watching, it is a heartbreaking sight. Their king, once so strong, now caught in a web spun by his own mind. Yet beneath the strangeness lies something deeply human. For in that moment, perhaps George found a refuge, a listener unburdened by judgment or ambition, a companion whose wisdom needed no words. To the oak, he could speak freely, releasing the tangled fears and hopes the world around him could no longer understand. The episodes worsened with time. The king's speech would race for hours, his words flowing in endless streams. His hands trembled, his eyes burned with unnatural light. The court grew tense, uncertain. Parliament whispered of regency. Physicians argued over treatments, some harsh, some gentle. And through it all, George struggled to reclaim the order he so cherished. There were moments of lucidity, brief and poignant, After long days lost to madness, the king would awaken with tears upon his cheeks, apologizing softly for words he could not recall. He would gaze upon his beloved queen, Charlotte, with aching tenderness, knowing the strain his illness placed upon her gentle heart, and still the man beneath the madness remained. In rare, quiet hours, George returned to his gardens, moving slowly among the trees and flowers. The simple act of tending to life, of guiding the growth of green and fragile things, brought him fleeting peace. The ticking of clocks, the structure of music, these anchors held him, if only for a while. The years turned slowly. His bouts of madness grew longer, more frequent. Ministers governed in his stead. His once steady hand could no longer guide the ship of state. Yet through it all, the people loved him still. For beneath the crown, beneath the strange and sorrowful illness, they saw a man who had tried always to rule with care and conscience. Now, as you rest here, safe and warm, imagine that ancient oak once more. Its roots run deep through the earth. Its branches swayed gently beneath the stars. The king's voice, once bright and clear, now fades upon the wind, a distant echo, lost to time. Yet in the rustle of the leaves, perhaps still, there lingers the memory of that strange conversation, a reminder that even the mightiest among us are, at heart, only human, seeking solace in a world that does not always yield to reason. In a time when kings were expected to be warriors, when thrones were secured by steel and ambition, there lived a king whose heart was drawn not to the clash of arms, but to the simple rhythm of honest labor. Edward II, King of England, a man born to rule a restless realm, yet whose greatest peace was found not in the great halls of state, but beneath the open sky, among the stone and thatch, where hands worked not to command, but to create. It was a strange thing, whispered about at court, for a king to love such humble work. But Edward cared little for whispers. He was a man of peculiar passions, and when the burdens of the crown pressed too heavily, when the intrigue and expectation of his lords weighed down his spirit, he would slip away, seeking solace in the company of builders and craftsmen. Imagine now the king, tall and broad of shoulder, his royal cloak cast aside, simple tunic dusted with lime and grit. The air is rich with the scent of freshly hewn timber, of earth, and straw. Around him, the voices of stonemasons rise and fall in soft cadence, measured words, the language of work. Hammers strike with steady rhythm, echoing through the crisp morning air. Edward moves among them, not as sovereign but as fellow laborer, eager hands reaching for stone and trowel. There is something timeless in the laying of stone, in the shaping of walls that will stand long after one's own footsteps fade from the earth. Edward understood this in ways few of his rank could. He marveled at the weight of a single block, the feel of mortar beneath his palms. Here, within the raw materials of the land, was a kind of truth, a world governed not by politics, but by the simple laws of craft and care. He would crouch beside the master mason, eyes bright with curiosity, absorbing every lesson. How to judge the grain of a stone, how to set each block so that the whole would endure. These things fascinated him far more than matters of war or council. In these moments, he was not king nor ruler. He was a student of earth and time. And then there was the thatch, humble, fragrant, alive with the scent of sun-dried reed. Edward would often watch the thatchers at work, nimble fingers weaving and layering, creating roofs both strong and beautiful. On many an afternoon, he would climb alongside them, laughing as he balanced upon the beams, eager to try his own hand at the ancient craft. His fingers, more accustomed to sword and scepter, grew deft with practice. He delighted in the feel of the reeds, in the patient rhythm of the work, one layer, then another, building something real and lasting beneath his touch. Those close to him saw this peculiar joy and came to understand. Here was a man who, beneath the weight of crown and duty, longed for connection to the world beyond court and cloak. He found it in the simplest of acts, a stone placed true, a roof made snug against the rain. In these things, Edward reclaimed a piece of himself, too often lost amidst the demands of kingship. There were days when the council sought him in vain, when urgent matters of state went unanswered, because the king was away, sleeves rolled, working beneath the sun. His lords grumbled. His rivals whispered of irresponsibility. Yet Edward remained undeterred. He knew, perhaps more deeply than any of them, that the heart needs such moments of grounding, needs to remember the feel of earth beneath one's feet, the satisfaction of work done well by one's own hands. In the quiet of twilight, when the tools were set aside and the day's labor ended, Edward would linger, gazing upon the walls he had helped raise, the roofs now gleaming gold in the slanting sun. There was peace in this, a peace no courtly triumph could offer. Among the craftsmen, he found companionship unmarred by politics or pretense. They spoke to him plainly, taught him freely, and in return he gave them something rare, the respect of a king who saw the nobility in their craft. It is said that even in the coldest months, when frost silvered the land and breath hung thick in the air, Edward would visit the work sites, cloak wrapped tight, eyes alight with anticipation. The biting wind did not deter him. The promise of creation called louder still. He would stand beside the masons as they lit small fires to warm their hands, sharing simple meals, listening to tales of stone and mortar beneath the winter stars. There was a quiet poetry to these moments, a rhythm that soothed the restless mind. For a king so often caught between the sharp edges of loyalty and betrayal, this work offered clarity. Stone did not lie, thatch did not plot. The labor of one's hands spoke a language older than crowns, a language Edward understood in his bones. Of course, such pursuits could not shield him forever from the storms of his reign. The court would call him back. The affairs of state would once more claim his hours. Yet always, in the spaces between duty and strife, Edward returned to the work that grounded him. Even in the final years of his troubled rule, when friends grew few and foes many, he sought solace in the simple, steadfast world of craft. And now, as you lie here, wrapped in warmth and stillness, imagine the king once more beneath the open sky, sleeves rolled, a stone resting in his palm, the hum of voices, the ring of hammer on stone, a timeless music drifting through the air. The walls rise slowly, course by course, beneath hands both royal and common. And in that quiet labor, beneath the weight of crown and history, a weary heart finds rest. In the grand tapestry of English history, where kings rise and fall with the turning of fortune's wheel, there is one figure whose reign glows faint and fragile, like a candle flickering against the vast darkness of time. Edward VI, a boy king, scarcely old enough to understand the weight of the crown upon his brow, yet thrust into the heart of a realm teetering between old faith and new. His was a brief and tender story, full of promise and shadows, a story best told softly now, as you rest beneath the gentle hush of night. Imagine England in the year of 1547. The land is cold, the fields bare beneath winter's pale breath. In the great stone halls of Hampton Court, a solemn procession winds its way beneath carved beams and stained glass. The mighty King Henry VIII lies dead, and in his place, a boy of 9 years takes the throne. Edward, bright-eyed, slender, with hair the color of pale flax, steps forward beneath the weight of ancient ceremony. His crown gleams, too large upon his small head, yet he stands with quiet grace. He is a child, taught to read before he could ride, to debate scripture before he learned the art of the sword. His mind, sharp as new-forged steel, holds the dreams of reformers and scholars, men who see in this young king the promise of a new and purer England. Yet beneath the solemn robes and careful words, Edward is still a boy, a child whose heart longs for simpler joys. In the early hours, before the stir of courtly business, he would slip from his chambers, pages trailing behind him. The gardens called to him first, crisp leaves beneath slippered feet, the air sweet with dew. Here, among the ordered beds and winding paths, Edward found moments of peace. He would pause beneath ancient oaks, gaze upward through branches veined with light, and feel for a time the freedom the crown had taken from him. His tutors spoke, in reverent tones of duty, of scripture and governance, and Edward listened well. Yet when lessons ended, his young fingers reached eagerly for quill and parchment. He loved to write, to capture in words the thoughts that spun bright and quick through his mind. In his neat, careful hand, he penned not only records of state, but poems and reflections, fragments of a boy's heart seeking to understand the world around him. And he read, oh, how he read. The great library of the palace became his second kingdom. There, amid towering shelves and dust-moted light, Edward wandered through histories and philosophies, tales of distant lands and ancient kings. Books were his true companions, offering realms where he might roam unfettered by title or expectation. He would lose himself for hours within their pages, the hum of distant voices fading to silence. Yet even a boy king yearns for play, and Edward was no different. When the affairs of state allowed, he would gather his few trusted companions, boys of noble birth, yet free in spirit, and together they would race through the palace halls, laughter echoing where solemn footsteps usually fell. They played at tilting with wooden swords, staged mock tournaments beneath the watchful gaze of stone lions and gilt angels. For a fleeting hour, the weight of crown and scepter vanished, and Edward was once more a child. But the demands of kingship returned, swiftly And often the great council met, voices raised in debate over the shaping of England's soul. Edward sat among them, small yet steady, his gaze bright with thought. Though young, he understood the tides shifting through his land, the break with Rome, the rise of new faith. He embraced reform with the fervor of youth, eager to see an England where truth and learning would flourish. Yet the body that bore this restless mind was fragile. Even as his thoughts soared, Edward's strength waned. Pale beneath the heavy robes of state, he coughed often, a hollow sound that drew worried glances. Physicians prescribed tonics and prayers, yet within the boy, shadow deepened. Still, he pressed on, driven by a sense of duty far beyond his years. In the quiet of his chambers, Edward would write of his hopes for England, of a land where justice ruled, where learning banished ignorance, where peace replaced strife. His words carried the clarity of one untainted by the cynicism of older men. He saw not the tangled thickets of power, but the straight path of virtue, and he believed with all his heart that such a path could be forged. Yet the wheel of fate turned swiftly. As the months passed, the court could no longer ignore the boy king's fading light. His face grew thinner, his hands trembled as they held the pen he loved so well. Still, he wrote, pages upon pages, as though through words he might outpace the illness stealing through him. He read, too, eyes bright with hunger, even as his strength waned. And often, when sleep eluded him, Edward would gaze long from his window, watching the stars wheel slowly across the velvet sky. Perhaps he found in their distant light a kindred constancy, a quiet order, untouched by earthly strife. In those final days, when breath came hard and fever clouded his thoughts, Edward's heart remained fixed upon the future of his realm. He dictated his last wishes, his voice thin yet firm, determined that England's course should hold to the truths he believed. And when the end came, it was gentle. A boy slipping quietly from the world of crowns and councils, leaving behind only the echo of his dreams. Now, as you lie warm and safe, imagine that young king once more, a slender figure seated in the glow of candlelight, pen moving steadily across the page. The great halls fall silent. The night wraps the palace in stillness. And in that hush, the hopes of a gentle heart, captured in ink and thought, drift softly through the centuries like a lullaby meant to soothe both kings and common souls alike. There are tales in history that shimmer like half-forgotten dreams, stories of kings not upon their thrones, but upon the run, casting aside robes of state to slip through the world unseen. Among them, none is more curious, nor more strangely comforting, than the tale of King Charles II's escape, a story of footsteps in the dark, of whispered words beneath ancient oaks, of a sovereign who once wore the humblest of disguises beneath a starlit sky. The year was 1651, a restless time. England, torn by civil war, had cast down the crown. Charles, young and defiant, sought to reclaim the throne his father had lost to the axe. But fate, ever the weaver of strange threads, had other designs. At the Battle of Worcester, the royalist forces were shattered, the Parliament's armies surged victorious, and the young king found himself a hunted man, the prize in a grim and patient chase. And so began a journey unlike any other in the life of a king. Imagine now the evening after the battle, shadows lengthening across the fields. The once proud banners lie tattered upon the ground. Smoke drifts slowly upward, mingling with the fading light. In a small, hastily gathered circle, Charles listens. Loyal friends speak in urgent tones. He must flee at once. The Parliament's soldiers scour the land, and the gallows await any who shelter him. With a steady heart, Charles casts off the remnants of his royal attire. The silken cloak, the fine boots, these must be left behind. In their place, rough woolen garments, worn shoes, a coarse cloak that smells faintly of smoke and earth. The transformation begins. A king unmade into a common wanderer. Under cover of night, the young monarch slips away, accompanied by a few steadfast companions. The roads are treacherous, patrolled by men who would give all for the king's capture. So, they avoid the roads altogether, moving through thickets and across hidden paths, where only the stars bear silent witness. There is something strangely soothing in this. A king walking not in procession, but in secrecy, beneath the vast hush of the heavens. Imagine him now, pausing beneath an ancient oak, breath misting in the cool night air. The bark is rough beneath his fingers. The scent of moss and leaf fills the senses. Here, in this quiet moment, Charles feels the pulse of the land more keenly than ever before. Yet the chase draws ever closer. Word spreads swiftly. Soldiers search farmsteads, forests, and inns. Each day brings new peril. Each night, a desperate hope for shelter. And so, one of the most curious episodes unfolds. The tale of the oak. Near the village of Boscobel, in Shropshire, stands an oak tree of great age and breadth. It is here that loyal allies lead the weary king. The plan is simple. If soldiers come, they will search the house, but perhaps not the heights of the ancient tree. At dawn, Charles climbs, up into the tangle of branches and leaves, until the ground lies hidden far below. There, nestled among the green canopy, he waits. The hours pass slowly, measured by the rustle of leaves and the distant voices of men below. Charles lies still, the rough bark pressing into his cheek, heart pounding with each shout that carries on the wind. Through the day, he remains there, eyes half closed against the dappled light. In the swaying branches, time seems to loosen its hold. The king's thoughts drift to his lost cause, to the faces of friends left behind, to the strange fate that has made him both sovereign and fugitive. And perhaps, in that stillness, he finds a strange peace, for in the embrace of the ancient oak, all the trappings of kingship fall away. He is simply a man, alive and hidden beneath a sky vast and eternal. When night returns, Charles climbs down, limbs stiff and weary. His journey continues, each step a dance between hope and peril. He moves from house to house, from farmhouse to barn, relying on the quiet courage of those willing to risk their lives for their king. In one home, he labors as a woodcutter's assistant, hands blistered from unfamiliar work. In another, he dons the guise of a servant, head bowed, eyes cast downward, Through it all, Charles listens, learns. He hears the voices of his people, not from a gilded throne, but from the worn benches of common rooms. He shares bread with farmers, sleeps beneath rough blankets, learns the lay of the land, not from maps, but from the whispers of the wind. The land of England, once seen from the saddle of a war horse, now unfolds beneath his weary feet. Weeks pass. The young king grows leaner, his gaze sharpened by hardship. Yet within him burns an unwavering resolve. Each morning brings new danger, yet also new resolve. The loyalty of those who shelter him, the warmth of hands extended in quiet defiance, strengthens his spirit. At last, after many narrow escapes, a plan emerges. A ship waiting upon the southern coast, ready to carry the king across the sea. The journey to the coast is fraught with peril. Each village and crossroads a potential snare, but with each careful step, the path grows clearer. Imagine now the final night before escape. Charles stands upon a wind-swept shore, the sea dark and restless before him. The ship, a small merchant vessel, bobs gently in the moonlight. Behind him lies a land scarred by war and loss. Before him, uncertain exile. He boards, the crew silent and grim. As the vessel slips away from the shore, the king stands at the rail, eyes fixed upon the receding land. In the salt-scented air, he breathes deeply, not as a sovereign triumphant, but as a man grateful simply to live. In the years to come, this tale would be told and retold. The king who climbed an oak, who walked in the guise of a peasant, who found in hardship a bond with his people stronger than any decree. And when, at last, Charles would return to England as king restored, he would remember those strange, quiet days, the rustle of leaves beneath which he had hidden, the kind hands that had shielded him, the deep and simple truths glimpsed beneath a star-strewn sky. There are stories that drift through the ages like mist, their edges blurred by time, their truths half buried beneath the weight of legend. One such story belongs to Richard III, a king whose name, for centuries, echoed with shadows. The last Plantagenet, the last king to die upon the battlefield of England. His life was a tale of power and peril, and his death, a mystery whispered beneath stone and soil. For more than 500 years, no man knew where his bones lay. The fields of Bosworth, where he fell, had long since yielded to plough and hedge. The grand abbey, where his body was said to have been buried, had vanished, its stones scattered by time. And so the centuries turned, leaving behind only rumor and the fading stain of his final hour. Yet time, strange and patient, has a way of revealing what was lost. It began not with kings or courtiers, but with quiet seekers, historians and archaeologists whose hearts beat to the slow rhythm of curiosity. They sifted through old records, fragile with age, piecing together the faintest traces of the past. Again and again, their paths led them to a small and unassuming place, a parking lot in the city of Leicester. Beneath this patch of modern life, paved and painted with yellow lines, had once stood Greyfriars Church, long vanished, its stones buried beneath layers of earth and memory. Here, the records hinted, Richard's body had been laid to rest. Could it truly be so? The thought hovered, tentative and fragile, as the first breath of dawn, and so, with quiet reverence, they began to dig. The sun rose softly upon the day the excavation began, light brushing across the edges of the city's rooftops. Machines hummed gently at first, scraping away the layers of tarmac, peeling back the skin of the present to reveal the bones of the past. As the hours passed, the work grew slower, hands replacing machines, tools delicate as a sculptor's brush. Days unfolded in careful rhythm, soil sifted, fragments uncovered, each moment steeped in patience and hope. Then, one quiet afternoon, beneath the chill of an autumn sky, they found it, the edge of a grave. It lay beneath a corner of the former church, untouched for centuries. The soil around it was rich with the scent of age, cool and damp beneath careful fingers. Slowly, reverently, they cleared away the earth, and there, in the shadowed hollow of the ground, lay a skeleton, fragile, twisted by time, yet unmistakably human. At first glance, there was no certainty. Bones tell stories, but they do so softly, requiring time to be heard. Yet even in those first moments, there were signs. The curvature of the spine, a sharp, unnatural curve, scoliosis written into bone, the shape of the skull, narrow and delicate. The wounds, harsh and brutal, blow struck in a storm of steel and blood. A life ended in violence. The breath of the team seemed to catch in the cold air. Could it be? The thought whispered through the space, like wind through hollow stone. The work continued, slow and deliberate. The skeleton was lifted with the gentlest of hands, carried away to be studied, its secrets waiting to be revealed. In a quiet laboratory, beneath the steady hum of lights, the bones began to speak. DNA was drawn from fragile fragments. Across oceans and centuries, living descendants of Richard's family were traced, their blood carrying echoes of a distant past. The samples were compared, one painstaking test after another, each step a thread woven through the loom of history. And then the answer came, a match. The skeleton beneath the Lexter car park was indeed Richard III, King of England, fallen at Bosworth, lost to time, now found. News of the discovery swept across the world, but beneath the headlines and triumph lay something deeper, something quieter. A king once shrouded in myth had been returned to the light, and in that return, history breathed anew. But perhaps most haunting of all were the wounds. The bones told their tale without words. Cuts to the skull, sharp and deep, blade marks upon the ribs, injuries to the pelvis, inflicted after death, brutal tokens of a final hour without mercy. Here was a man who had stood beneath a storm of iron and fury, who had fought as the ground beneath him turned to mud and blood. And yet, beneath the violence, beneath the centuries of blame and rumor, there remained something achingly human. Richard had known fear. He had known hope. In his heart had burned the desperate will to survive, to preserve crown and cause. And when the end came, it had found him not in a royal chamber, but beneath an open sky, sword in hand, alone amid the clash and roar. Now, as you lie in the hush of the night, Imagine the scene. The pale morning mist drifts across the fields of Bosworth. The shouts and steel have faded, only the crows remain. Dark shadows against the rising sun, and beneath the earth, in the cold embrace of forgotten stone, a king rests, his story waiting to be told once more. And centuries later, when quiet hands reached down through time to lift him from the soil, it was not to crown him again, nor to condemn him, but simply to remember, to give back to history a man who had been lost, and in doing so, to remind us all that beneath crown and legend, we are, each of us, only bones beneath the earth, our stories woven softly through the folds of time. In the long, winding corridors of history, there are chapters touched with shadows, moments when fear whispered louder than reason, when kings and common folk alike were swept by unseen winds. One such chapter unfolded beneath the rule of King James I, a monarch whose mind, both sharp and restless, became ensnared by the dark allure of witchcraft and the fevered hunt that followed. James was a scholar king, a man of words and books, of curious intellect. He read deeply, pondered long, and sought understanding of both the divine and the unseen. Yet for all his reason, there lingered within him a fascination and a dread of the hidden forces said to stir beneath the surface of the world. It began, as such things often do, with a storm. In the year 1590, before James had ascended the English throne, he made a voyage across the restless North Sea to claim his bride, Anne of Denmark. The crossing should have been swift, yet the winds turned fierce. Great waves battered the ship. Masts groaned beneath the strain. For days they fought the sea, and when at last they reached the safety of shore, whispers began to swirl. This was no mere storm, some claimed. It was the work of witches. At first, the notion seemed fanciful, yet the idea took root in James's mind. He pondered it deeply, the thought that dark forces could shape wind and wave, could reach out unseen to thwart the will of kings. His fascination grew into conviction, and from that conviction sprang a fear that would cast long shadows across his reign. Imagine now the halls of Scotland, where fires crackled beneath heavy beams, and the air grew thick with murmured tales. Witches, women and men said to consort with the devil, to summon storms, to blight crops and twist fate, became the whispered specters of the time. Trials were held, and beneath the weight of fear and pain, confessions were drawn. Confessions shaped as much by dread as by truth. James, ever drawn to the pursuit of knowledge, delved deeper still. He questioned, he studied, he wrote. In 1597, he penned a work titled Demonologie, a learned treatise on witchcraft and the dark arts. Within its pages, he wove theology and folklore, warning of the hidden dangers lurking in the world. It was both a scholar's exploration and a king's decree, and it would help to fan the flames of witch hunting across the land. When James later ascended to the throne of England in 1603, he brought with him both wisdom and wariness. The English court, already steeped in its own superstitions, soon reflected the king's fascination. Laws grew harsher, trials spread. In villages and towns, beneath thatched roofs and in stone halls, the old fear awoke once more. Picture now a quiet English hamlet beneath a leaden sky. Smoke curls from chimneys. The fields lie bare and cold. Yet within the hearts of its folk, unease stirs. A cow sickens without cause. A child falls ill. The weather turns cruel. Whispers begin. The old woman who lives alone at the edge of the wood, the healer whose knowledge of herbs surpasses the common sort. Such ones draw wary eyes. And so the pattern unfolds, simple and ancient, fear seeking a face to wear. The trials, when they came, were grim affairs. Accusations flew swift and sharp. Evidence was thin, yet suspicion weighed heavy. The accused were pressed, questioned, made to endure tests, meant to prove guilt or innocence, though such tests were often traps from which there was no escape, floating in water, seeking marks upon the skin, enduring the relentless gaze of those convinced of evil. These were the tools of justice in an age of fear. James himself attended some of these trials. He questioned the accused with sharp curiosity, seeking to unearth the workings of witchcraft. Yet even he, amid the growing tide of hysteria, sometimes wavered. He urged caution, warned against false accusations. For the king, though caught in fascination, retained a flicker of reason. But in the villages and towns, the hunger for scapegoats could not be so easily stilled. The years passed. The fervor waxed and waned, as such storms do. James grew older, his interests shifting. The fierce obsession of his youth softened into more tempered caution. He came to see that not all those accused were guilty, that fear, once unleashed, could turn upon the innocent as swiftly as upon the guilty. Yet the echoes of that time lingered. In the soft hush of night, one might still imagine those distant days. The flicker of torchlight upon stone walls, the rustle of parchment bearing dire accusations, the low murmur of anxious voices. Beneath it all lay the deeper truth, that fear is a force both ancient and restless, forever seeking new shapes to wear. And James, for all his learning and kingship, was but a man. Like all men, he stood sometimes helpless before the darker tides of his own heart. His fascination with witchcraft was born not of malice, but of the same yearning that draws us all, the desire to understand that which lies beyond the veil, to grasp the shape of shadows. Now, as you rest in the quiet of your own time, imagine the king once more, seated alone in a great chamber, candlelight dancing across the pages of demonology. His pen moves slowly, thoughts deep and tangled. Outside, the wind stirs the ancient trees, and within, the mind of a king drifts through the dark currents of fear and wonder, searching, always searching, for answers in the unseen. In the grand gallery of English kings, where portraits hang in solemn rows, each gaze fixed in timeless command, there is one figure whose story hums with a different tone. William IV, the Sailor King, as he was called, wore the crown with a heart forever drawn to the open sea. His life, unlike the brocaded lives of kings before him, sang of simplicity, of rough winds and salt spray, of a love not for courtly pomp, but for the rolling tides and honest work of sailors. He had not been born to rule. William, the third son of King George III, spent his youth beneath the billowing sails of His Majesty's Navy. While others were schooled in diplomacy and courtly graces, William climbed rigging, hauled ropes, and learned the language of wind and water. The sea, with its vast, shifting moods, became his first kingdom. Imagine now a young midshipman, no more than 13, standing barefoot upon the deck of a frigate, the dawn rising pale upon a restless sea. The ship rolls gently beneath. The sky, the scent of salt and tar fills the air. Around him, sailors move with practiced ease, faces lined by sun and storm. William, for all his royal blood, is one among them, an eager boy with calloused hands and windburned cheeks. Through years of service, from Caribbean waters to the cold coasts of the North Sea, he learns the rhythms of a sailor's life, the snap of canvas in a rising gale, the deep groan of the hull as it rides a tempest, the solemn silence of a star-strewn night watch. These moments shape him, weaving the sea's song into the very marrow of his being. And with that song comes a deep and lasting simplicity. Unlike the stiff, gilded rituals of court, life at sea strips all men to their essence. Rank matters less beneath the lash of storm. Courage and comradeship matter most. William thrived in this world of plain speech and clear purpose. Even as he rose through the naval ranks, the sea remained his true teacher, its lessons etched in every line upon his weathered face. Years passed, and fate, ever capricious, drew him back to shore. He returned not as a boy, but as a seasoned admiral, a man who had stood upon decks as cannon thundered, who had weathered tempests with steady hand and clear eye. And yet, even amid the drawing rooms of London, his heart remained bound to the sea's wide embrace. He lived simply, shunning the elaborate graces expected of a royal. In his house at Bushy Park, he walked the grounds in well-worn boots, greeting gardeners and grooms with the same easy manner he had shown to shipmates. Servants soon learned that this was no prince of icy reserve, but a man who valued honesty and plain talk above polished airs. And then, as if by a trick of the tides, the crown came to him. In 1830, after the death of his brother George IV, William, now in his 60s, was called to the throne. The Sailor King became King of England, yet even beneath the weight of ermine and scepter, he remained at heart a sailor. Court life bemused him. Ceremonies struck him as absurd, flattery as tiresome. He preferred instead to dine in modest company, to converse with old friends from his naval days, their talk flowing as freely as the sea breeze. On warm evenings, he would stroll the gardens alone, eyes lifting often to the stars, familiar companions from 1,000 nights at sea. His love of the Navy never dimmed. He visited ships often, speaking not as a distant sovereign, but as one of their own. Sailors found in him a king who understood their trials, who had once hoisted sails and braved the lash of the sea. They loved him for it, and in their rough cheers, one heard not the deference of subjects, but the affection of shipmates. William's simplicity extended beyond manner to his very rule. He disliked excess, distrusted intrigue, and sought to govern with the clear, steady hand of a seasoned captain. His reign, though brief, steered England through turbulent political waters with surprising calm. Reforms were made, not with grand proclamations, but with quiet resolve. At court, he continued to confound expectations. Formal dinners might see him abandon rigid etiquette in favor of hearty laughter and plain fare. Tales tell of him greeting astonished visitors in worn dressing gown and slippers, a twinkle in his eye. It mattered little to him. The sea had taught him the true measure of a man lay not in his dress, but in his deeds. Yet beneath the sailor's ease beat a heart of deep feeling. William loved his family fiercely, cherishing time spent with them in quiet rooms far from the gaze of the court. His affection for Dorothea Jordan, his longtime companion and the mother of his many children, was well known. Though political necessity later forced their parting, her memory remained a tender presence in his life, and always there was the sea in his final years. As age drew its gentle veil across his sight, William often spoke of the ocean's call. Friends would find him gazing long out toward the distant horizon, fingers unconsciously tracing the grain of a walking stick, as though it were the rail of a ship. The rhythm of the tides seemed to echo in his voice, a voice softened by time, yet still carrying the deep, slow cadence of one who had known the sea's embrace. Now, as you lie beneath your own quiet sky, imagine the Sailor King once more. An old man walks alone upon a moonlit path. The garden's hushed beneath the stars. The cool night air carries a faint scent of salt and earth. His steps are slow, yet steady. In his mind's eye, canvas billows. The wind hums through rigging, and beneath him the deck sways gently to the sea's eternal song. For in the heart of this king, simplicity reigned, a simplicity born not of innocence, but of understanding. The sea had taught him its greatest truth, that life, like the tide, is ever flowing, and that in each moment of calm or storm, there is beauty to be found, if one only listens, quietly, deeply, as though listening to the lull of waves beneath a starlit sky. In the vast and quiet gardens of Kew and Windsor, where ancient trees stand like sentinels whispering secrets to the wind, there once lived a king whose mind wandered through worlds both real and imagined. George III, often remembered for his long reign and the trials that came with it, carried within him a gentle fascination, a belief that the trees themselves could speak, that nature was alive with a voice just beyond the veil of ordinary hearing. It is said that in the twilight hours, when the sun dips low and the shadows stretch long, the king would walk alone among the towering oaks and elms, his footsteps soft upon the mossy earth. Around him, the world seemed to hush, as if holding its breath for a story to be told. The gardens, vast and sprawling, became a sanctuary for his restless spirit. George loved the natural world deeply. To him, the trees were not mere plants, but ancient beings, keepers of time and memory. Some say he believed he could hear their voices in the rustling leaves, that the wind carried whispers meant only for him. This was a king whose heart sought comfort in the quiet mysteries of life, a man who found solace beneath the dappled canopy of green. Imagine now the late afternoon light filtering softly through branches, casting a gentle glow on the path ahead. The air is thick with the scent of earth and leaves, a fragrance both soothing and alive. George walks slowly, his hands folded behind his back, eyes lifted to the sky through the shifting lace of leaves. The garden is a world apart, a place where time slows, where the burdens of crown and country momentarily fade. In his quieter moments, the king would stop beside an ancient tree, laying a hand gently upon its bark. The rough texture spoke of centuries, storms weathered, seasons past. To George, each tree had a story, a soul that resonated with his own. He spoke to them softly, as one might speak to a trusted friend, sharing thoughts and seeking answers in their silent presence. It is easy to imagine the scene, the king's voice low and steady, a murmur blending with the rustle of leaves. Perhaps he asked about the distant past, about kings long gone, or about the mysteries of the world that no man could fully grasp. Or perhaps he simply spoke of his hopes, his fears, and the heavy weight of ruling a nation. His attendants, who observed these moments from afar, often found it strange, a monarch communing with trees. Yet in that quiet communion lay something profoundly human, a yearning for connection, a search for peace in the midst of turmoil. George's mind, brilliant but troubled, sometimes drifted into the realms of imagination. The line between reality and fantasy blurred in those garden walks. Some believed that in these moments the king heard the very voices of the trees, ancient whispers that spoke in riddles and rhythms beyond human words. The king's fascination with nature extended beyond mere fancy. He was a patron of the sciences and arts, a lover of botany and agriculture. The gardens of Kew flourished under his care, becoming a living library of plants from across the world. Yet amid this worldly knowledge, George held fast to the belief that nature's deepest truths were hidden beneath the surface, secrets that could only be heard by those willing to listen with heart and soul. Imagine now the gardens at night, bathed in silver moonlight. Shadows stretch long and mysterious. The rustle of leaves becomes a soft song, and the trees, standing tall and silent, seem to lean in, as though eager to share their ancient wisdom with a king who had learned their language. It is a story of solitude and wonder, of a man who found friendship not in courtly halls, but in the quiet presence of living things. A king who, beneath the trappings of power, was simply a soul seeking peace. As you lie in your own quiet place under your own gentle night sky, picture yourself walking beside George III through those timeless gardens. Feel the soft earth beneath your feet, the cool breath of the wind, the whisper of leaves overhead. Let your mind wander with the king, slow and calm, hearing the soft murmur of the trees, their ancient voices weaving a lullaby just for you. In that lullaby is a reminder that even in the midst of great responsibility and challenge, there is a world of quiet beauty waiting to be heard, a world that speaks in the language of rustling leaves and gentle breezes, inviting you to rest, to breathe, to dream. And so, these kings of England, with their odd habits, strange fears, and curious lives, drift away into the tapestry of time as you too let go of the day and allow yourself to sink into the softness of sleep. Remember Every life holds its peculiar moments, and tonight, your only task is to rest. Good night. From the sleep voice, sweet dreams.